Hi guys, so welcome back to another video on Service Fabric. So in the previous videos, we set up the communication between our services and we used our partitioning to communicate to our product catalog stateful service from our communication API service. In the next couple of videos, we're going to look at how we can use the inbuilt Service Fabric Reliable Collections to store data reliably in our Service Fabric stateful service. And storing reliably is similar to storing in a database. It means that we're storing the data in our Service Fabric cluster, but it is not only stored on the primary replica, but also on the secondary replicas. So if the primary replica goes down, we will still have the object stored in our secondary replicas, so we will still be able to access it, and we won't lose any data on node failure. And because we have also partitioned our service, we will only store the objects related to the partition key we have chosen on the particular partition. So say if we partition on product type, each partition will store only the data relevant to that type. So one of the types might be cars, one partition will only store products that are of type car, another type might be ship, another partition will only store products that are related to the type ship, or you might choose a numeric partition based off the product ID. Whatever will split our load evenly across all our partitions is usually the best to choose. So let's jump into writing some code. So we'll start by defining in our product catalog what a product is. So if we add a new class and just call it product, and we'll add a couple of properties to the class to indicate what we want to store in reliable state. So we'll make this public. And we have to make anything that we're using in reliable state serializable. So we'll make it a data contract. And we need to add the reference to that. So we'll say using system runtime serialization. And on our product, we'll store a couple of things. So we might have the ID of the product as an int. We might have the product name as a string. And we might have the product type again as a string for now. And again, all of these will be data member because we want our entire object to be serializable. And it needs to be serializable because we are writing it to disk and in memory, because Service Fabric Reliable State and Reliable Collections will store both in memory and on disk depending on certain circumstances. And it will also be transferred across the wire because it will be replicated from different instances of our service to achieve that high level of reliability that we talked about earlier in this video. So now that we have our product object defined, we can start to use the reliable collection to start storing products. So let's go back to the main class of our service, the product catalog class, and let's start adding in our reliable collections. In this video, we're going to focus on the reliable dictionary. In the next video, we will look more at a reliable queue. So we'll add a new method in our product catalog, and we'll just simply call it getProduct. Public async, and it will be a task returning, and it will return a product. And we'll call it getProduct by ID. And it will take the int ID of the product we're trying to get. And we'll add another method, just task returning, and we'll call it addProduct. And that will take a product object as its input. So Service Fabric has something called a state manager, which we can use to access our reliable collections, be them reliable dictionaries or reliable queues. So we can say we want to access our state manager and store it in a variable. So we can say this state manager and set that into our state manager variable. So once we have a reference to our state manager, we want to get the dictionary, the reliable dictionary we want to write our data to. So we'll say var product dict is equal to state manager. And there's a number of different methods we can call here. We can call get or add async, which will add a new reliable dictionary or reliable collection to our Service Fabric state manager if it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it will simply get it. We can also use try get async, which will try get one if it exists, but won't add it if it doesn't. So get or add async is usually the simplest to use. And in this case, we want an reliable dictionary. And then we have, just like any other dictionary, we have the key and the value. In this case, we'll use int as the product ID as the value we want to store, or as the key we want to store, sorry, and the product itself as the value. And finally, in the method, we need to pass in a name for the reliable dictionary. And this has to be unique. So the product dictionary will just simply be product dict. So this will either get an existing reliable dictionary or add a new one. And the reliable dictionary is called product dict inside the state manager. So anytime we call get or add async for this type and give it this string as the parameter, we will return the same reliable dictionary. So we can then write to the reliable dictionary or read from the reliable dictionary. If we gave a different name here, we would be given a completely different reliable dictionary. So when we're reading or writing from a reliable collection, in this case a reliable dictionary, we have to do so inside a transaction. And again, we can use our state manager to create this transaction. So we can say using var tx is equal to state manager dot create transaction. And just like a transaction in any sort of database, this will be completely ACID and will either all complete or none of it will complete. So inside this using statement is where we write our code to either add or remove a product from our reliable collection. And one thing we forgot to add here is this is get or add async, and it's in an asynchronous method. So we just need to await this. So finally, we can write our code to add the product to our reliable dictionary. So we have reference to our reliable dictionary here, and we have our transaction. So to add a product to the dictionary, we can simply call product dict. And then there are several methods available on this. We can add async, we can add or update async, we can clear, we can do several different things, most of which are the same as any dictionary in C#. But in this case, we'll just add async as it's quite simple. And to do this, we want to pass the transaction, and we also want to pass the key and the value. So we're passing the product into our method here. Key will be product.id, and the value will be the product itself. And again, this is asynchronous, so we need to await it. And then once we have finished adding all of our things to our dictionary that we want to do inside our using statement, we need to complete the transaction. So we will call await, and then we will say transaction. So in this case, tx is what we're calling our iTransaction, and then commit async. So again, this method should then load our reliable dictionary, create a transaction, add our product to our reliable dictionary, and commit the transaction. So it's that simple. And Service Fabric will take care of the replication of this product throughout our cluster and make sure it's highly reliable and highly available. So let's do something similar for the get product by ID. So in this case, rather than add to a reliable dictionary, you want to get something from a reliable dictionary. So again, we're going to need reference to our state manager and the same product reliable dictionary that we've been writing to called product dict. This should return the same reliable collection that we've just written to in this method here. And again, we want to call using because we want a transaction, but the inners of our using will be slightly different when we're getting. So we want to call the product dict, and what we can do here is we can call get or add async, or we can call try get value. So in this case, we'll try get the value that we've just added. So we need to again pass in our transaction and the key of the dictionary value we're trying to get, in this case, the ID of the product. And again, this is awaitable, so we need to await it. And because we call try get value async, Service Fabric will return a conditional value. So in our simple example, we'll simply just return the product dot value, or else we'll throw a new exception. So this isn't perfect code. I wouldn't recommend doing this in a production system, but just to get our system working quickly, we'll simply just assume this has a value every time and return that. If not, we'll throw an exception. So now that we've added our get product ID and add product to our stateful service, we should make these available over our stateful interface so they can be called by the API. So let's add those two to this interface. So we now have our get product by ID. We need to add a reference to product here, which is defined in product catalog. So we've made a slight mistake here. This product has been defined in our product catalog, but it really should have been defined in a separate project which contains the contracts that we're going to be using with our interface. So we're simply just going to move that product up to this communication, and we're going to change the namespace to communication. So this will mean that we'll be able to reference our product in all of our services. So the API will be able to reference it and the product catalog will be able to reference it. So we'll delete that. And we will just add the references here. So it's already referencing the communication product. So finally, we will add the other interface method to the stateful service interface. So we can call get product by ID and add product through the API. So that's that second interface method added. And now the iStateful interface is looking a bit more fleshed out. So let's go to our API and let's add one or two API controller methods, which will allow us to proxy to our product catalog service and get products from different partitions and from the reliable state manager in those partitions. In the communication service, let's add two new methods. I'll just copy this one again for ease. So we'll call this root add product. And this will be a HTTP post because we want to post a product to it. And from query, we will simply get our product and we'll call that product. And this won't actually return anything, so we'll just return an empty task. And we need to get the partition ID from the product. So again, the partition ID will base off the ID of the product itself. So we'll just simply call product.id. And this will be modded on 3. So we use the same stateful proxy. We're proxying to the iStateful interface, which we've added the new methods to. And we're connecting to the correct partition ID. And then we're calling get service details. So we no longer want to call get service details. We want to call add product, and we want to pass the product that we've passed into the API. And this is void returning, so we do not need to return anything here. So just to quickly go through the add product controller method, we've changed the root to add product. We've changed the method name, and it's now just task returning, doesn't return anything except the task. And we're getting the product from the product query. We're using the product ID to determine which partition we want to route our request to. We're getting a reference to our service the same as before, and we're calling the new method on the interface add product. Let's continue by fixing our second method here to get the product that we will add with the add product call. So we'll simply rename it to get product. It can still be a HTTP get. We want to return a product, so inside the task we'll return product, and we'll rename the method to get product. And again, we still need the product ID from the query, so we can leave that as is. And this will mean that we're routing to the correct partition, passing the product ID, generating the partition ID in the same manner as we're adding it. So this should guarantee that we're routed to the correct partition. We get the stateful proxy the same as before, reference to the service URI and the partition ID using Microsoft Service Fabric Services Client Service Partition Key. And we just want to change this final bit here to return the product from the call we just added to the iStateful interface. So that is get product by ID, and we'll simply pass it the product ID, and we will return the product. As this returns the product, get product by ID returns a task of product, which means it's awaitable. So we await that and we should get the product, and then we can return the product. So these two HTTP methods in our ASP.NET controller should then proxy to our product catalog, which will go into reliable state and either add or get something from that reliable collection based off the product ID, which we use as our partition key. Let's open up Postman now and let's try out a couple of these calls. Let's add a couple of products to our collections. And just before we start calling these API calls in Postman, we're just going to make one quick change to our add product method in the product catalog class. So instead of having on the product dictionary add async, we're going to use add or update async. So we'll have the product dictionary add or update async. It'll be a very similar method. We'll have the transaction, the product ID, the product itself, and then we have to give it a func, which is called the update value factory. So just for that, we'll just do kv and v, and that should work. So we can delete the add async, and then we'll use add or update async as part of our transaction here when we're adding the product to our reliable collection. And this will mean that even if we're adding a product that already exists, it will simply just be updated rather than throwing an exception. Okay, so we're back in Postman now, and we've set some breakpoints in Visual Studio. So let's make these two calls, the get request to get our product by ID, and we have a post call here as well, which will add a new product. And for the post call, we've set the content type to application JSON, and in the body we just have a simple JSON product with the ID, the name of the product, which is in this case is BMW, and the type, which is the car, as a string. So we'll send this request, and the port number, as we saw in the previous video, is defined in the service manifest of the API. So let's send this, and we should hit our breakpoints, and we should see how Service Fabric adds a product to a reliable dictionary, or adds an object to a reliable dictionary. So we've hit our API endpoint here. The first thing we do is determine the partition ID by getting the modulus of the product ID. So the partition ID we're going to use here is 1. And then we create the service proxy to our stateful service by giving it the URL of the service and also the partition key, which has as a parameter the partition key that we generated here. So we'll continue here and we'll call the add product method on our service. So if we continue, we eventually hit the breakpoint in add product, and we've passed in our product, and we can see that it's ID 1, BMW, and of type car. So we need to load our state manager and then load the product dictionary, in this case get or add async. So we'll actually be creating the reliable dictionary here with the key product dict. So we'll continue on. Inside our transaction, we'll then add or update to this product dictionary with the key product ID and the product itself, passing in the transaction to, so that if the transaction drops out halfway through, we haven't changed anything in our collection. So we'll continue and we'll commit async, and that is the end of that transaction. We've HTTP posted to our API, the API has proxied to our stateful service, and we've added the product to our reliable dictionary. Now let's see if we can get the product from the reliable dictionary using our other call. Again, we're calling here on port 8732 /communication/get product, and we're passing as a query parameter the product ID equals 1. Remember that this is a get request, not a post request. And I've already set up some breakpoints in our service so we can see how this happens. So let's send this get request for product ID 1, which is the same ID as the product we just added in our post. So we hit our breakpoint, we generate our partition key, which should be the same as the partition key we got before. Partition ID 1, we create our proxy, and then we call the get product by ID method on our stateful service. So we got in here, again, we do the same as previously, get the product dictionary, which in this case already exists. So the get or add async will simply retrieve it rather than create it. And then inside our transaction, we get the product based on its ID, passing in the transaction again. So we can see here that we have the product, which is of type conditional value, and it has a value true, and inside the value you can see the ID 1, name BMW, and type car. So we simply return that product, and that's returned to the API, which in turn will be returned to Postman, and we can see here that our product is returned. So they are the very basics of working with reliable collections. This video has mostly been focused on reliable dictionaries, But in the next video, we will start to look at reliable queues. And we'll do a bit more with partition keys to see what happens when we pass different partition keys and what will be stored in our queues. So thanks for watching the video, guys. If you liked it and are looking for more Service Fabric content, please subscribe to the channel.